Okay, Nat, I have to confess something. So when I was going over our notes and you're like, yeah, and Ike orchestrated the kidnapping, I was like, what? Do it.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to Stayed Up Book Club. So we are reading Long Island Compromise by Taffy Brodesser-Akner. And yeah, we're reading the second half, or we've read the second half. I will never say that right. I'll always say we're reading, but today we're talking about it.
I love it. I guess it's like, yeah, we're all reading it together. It's not inaccurate. I don't think so.
I just get really hung up on the tenses there. But anyway, this book was so good. Oh my gosh. Like, I'm obsessed with how she's writing. I'm obsessed with how she told the story. And yeah, there was a lot that I kind of didn't see coming. And
Yeah.
I'm so excited to talk about all of it.
Me too. It was one of those books where when I finished, I felt like I had to take a deep breath. Like, no, I didn't cry at the end. Very few books make me cry at the end, but this is one of those books where I was just like, oh, like, I don't know, it just felt like it was a lot in a very good way. Like you said, the writing was so beautiful. She's really good at backstory and weaving it into these moments that are pertinent to other things that are happening, like to the plot. And yeah, she's just such a good writer, and I'm obsessed. But I feel like there's so much to talk about. So I'm going to try to quickly summarize it and be very succinct, and we'll see how we do with that. But so last time we ended with like Beamer collapsing, and we realized that all the money is gone, and that's kind of where we are. Also, and Nathan finding out that he's also lost all of his money to Mickey. We finally get Jenny's POV, the person that we've been waiting for, and we find out that she's actually been lying to her family this whole time about working for a socialist party in Connecticut. And she's actually just like never left university, even though we find out she's close to 40. No judgment,
Mhm.
but she's totally lying to her family. What university did she go to? Was it Yale? It was one of the
Was it
Ivy League.
Brown?
Maybe it was
It,
Brown.
Yeah, because I think she did go to Yale, or maybe she like did like an internship there or something, but then she like moved on. And I think it was Brown where she ended up sticking around.
That feels right because they said something about like being able to. Brown was appropriate for her because it was like one of the few universities in a working class town. She's been doing is essentially working as like a student union rep and just getting paid like a very small salary. And we get a little bit of her backstory, which is that she couldn't really figure out what she wanted to do with her life, which she was just like constantly changing majors. She eventually ended up at Brown, and when she was there, she was working as a TA doing a graduate degree, and this woman comes up to her, like one of her peers, and is like, I can't believe you're doing this right now, like correcting assignments as a TA. And she's like, what are you talking about? She's like, we're on strike. And she's like, I didn't know there was a
Mhm.
strike going on. Like, she felt very embarrassed about it all. And this confrontation from this woman leads her into this depression. And she isolates herself for a while. We find out that, like, Jenny always falling asleep is somehow, like, her coping mechanism. Like, she just kind of gives way to like her body just kind of empties itself and she falls asleep, and this is her mechanism. So she's been like asleep for a couple of weeks, and Beamer shows up at her door. I think he brings her back to LA, and while they're there he's confronting her about the fact that she's getting older. These might be two different timelines actually. She does then join the student union.
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, the storytelling is like it's going back and forth,
It is
right? So
going
I
back
think
and
you're
forth.
telling it. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so eventually Beamer confronts her about one of her depressive episodes, and she goes back to LA there. She stays with him. This is when she finds out that he has been abusing prescription drugs. And this is kind of what severs their tie, which had been alluded to in the first half, and they're not really talking. So that's kind of what's going on in Jenny's life right now. She doesn't feel accepted by her family. The one person that she did feel accepted by, she feels betrayed by him, and now she's just kind of like lost. She goes to the brownstone, the family brownstone, and essentially squats there for a while. And one day she comes back and from an errand or something, and her mother Ruth is there. And Ruth, this is when we start to get Ruth's POV. And it's really interesting because we find out that Ruth's background is that she wasn't actually in love with Carl. She was in love with another man, but she married Carl for his wealth and his security. And we find out that she actually really hates her life. Like, she hates living in Middle Rock. There's this really beautiful passage where she talks about how she hates being, in this world where it's all about like routine and anxiety about routine and this treadmill of just always living the same day and repeat and being surrounded by middle-aged people and children, and there's no like serendipity and spontaneity, and she feels like she gave that all up when she married Carl. And we also find out that she really resents her children. And she resents her children because she grew up poor, and she, even though she's now rich or has money, she always feels like the bottom's going to fall out from her. And she kind of resents her kids that they've never had to struggle. That's
That was
definitely.
so heartbreaking for
Wasn't
like
it?
she was, yeah, where she's actually like um I think she calls Jenny a rich girl. She's like, "Oh, you think like a rich girl," and she means it as such an insult for her. She's like, I didn't pass on this like drive to survive to you,
Mm-hmm.
and the way it was told was so like it was such a gut punch. Like I think that was done really effectively, especially because it she really talks about how she really didn't want to pass on this like
Yeah.
survival instinct to her children, and then when she didn't, that in itself was upsetting for her, and it's like damned if you do, damned if you don't. You just kind of can't win in that situation.
It's so sad. It really made me wonder, what that's like when you do leave a certain socioeconomic background and you jump socioeconomic levels. How does that feel like when you then have children that are being born into such a completely different culture from your own? Like how do you make sure they're not spoiled? Like you want your kids, I imagine you want your kids to have everything. You don't want to put your kids through the life that you've had to suffer through, but then to see them not suffer at all in that way, I can't imagine that it wouldn't be a little bit almost disheartening to see like, oh, my kids don't have to try for anything. It is interesting to watch, and I definitely wonder what that would be like as a human to see that, because it happens all the time.
Mm-hmm. No,
But
absolutely. Yeah, keep going. And then what
yeah. And then,
happens?
oh my gosh, so much happens. Okay, so we get Ruth's POV. And then we also get in the middle of all this, and I don't want to forget it just because I do think it's this really interesting parallel. We get this mini story in the story, which is about, I think the girl's name was Finkelstein. And it was one of Jenny's friends, and she remembers her as being someone who like didn't have money for a little while, but then all of a sudden her family started to have money. And we found out the reason is because her father had bought essentially a like a deed for a Jewish burial, and he bought one, but he was selling it to young and healthy people over and over and over again, this single deed to make money, hoping that like it just like would never catch up with him, like he'd be dead and gone before people started to find out. But then after it was found out that people were going to try to get buried and it wasn't available, he ended up in jail, the family lost all their money, and this was something that always struck Jenny as significant in her life, like watching this family go from nothing to something to nothing again. So, anyways, that was kind of a story in a story that was very interesting. Then, so we also cut as if this is a movie. Go to the twins' bar mitzvah. This is
It
the
should be.
thing. Cut to. It does feel like a movie. This would better end up being like a series. It feels very succession-y to me. But cut to the twins' bar mitzvah, which is Alyssa and Nathan's two kids. And this has been the thing that Alyssa's been looking forward to. Alyssa now knows that they've lost everything, and she's very good about it. She's kind of like, Nathan, we're partners. Why didn't you tell me this before? But she's very loving, and she's like, it's okay. You get some sleep. We're still going to go ahead with the kids' bar mitzvah. Everything's paid for, so we might as well do it. He agrees. They move on. They go through the motions. The bar mitzvah, as it's funny because it makes it seem like it was a success. Like everyone showed up and had a wonderful time. The catering was amazing. The twins had such a good time. This is the story that Alyssa would tell everyone for years to come, the people who never showed up. But in reality, it is okay, except for the fact that Carl dies. At the very end, we kind of get this brief moment where we have his POV, and he's walking out into the backyard. He's following his mother. On the way out there, he kind of has this peaceful moment where he's finally out of his body, and he can now separate his body from the kidnapping. That sort of, this didn't happen to you, this happened to your body. So it's almost like this moment when he's finally peaceful. We get a glimpse of him in the afterlife where he's sitting down at a table with his father Zelig and his mother. That's something I forgot to tell everyone, is that we do get the backstory of Carl's father, which is that he came um, over from Poland after he had been hiding away in like a bunker or something. And while he was there was another chemist there who was dying. And he's like, take my formula with you. I'm dying anyways. And use my name to get, and in this ticket, use my name to get over to America. Save yourself. He does that. We find out when Carl's dying that this was all a lie. And that in fact, Zelig killed this young man for the formula and the ticket to America. And this is what enabled the Fletchers to have this really rich life, was by Zelig killing this man. So Carl dies. The next day is Carl's funeral, but then also Phyllis's headstone revealing, or whatever that's called. And in this moment, Arthur shows up out of nowhere to Ruth, the guy who's been missing this whole time, the guy who last time we were wondering like what's happening there. And he shows up and says, I'm here to pay my respects for Phyllis. And Ruth's like, no, Carl's dead. And Arthur's like, what? Ruth Arthur also confesses his love to Ruth. Ruth is angry because she's like, you don't understand. Like, you left us in a time of need. Everything's gone. All the money is gone. Arthur's like, no, it's not. There's diamonds buried in the backyard because obviously Phyllis and Zelig didn't trust banks after the Holocaust. Totally fair. So they've been hiding diamonds in like coffee cans, and also all the Israel bonds they've been given over the years, also in coffee cans in the backyard. And turns out they're still rich and they're all fine and everything's fine, but also everything's terrible because there's no suffering. And that is essentially the end of the story. Ruth and the whole family, they leave Middle Rock. The estate is sold to another wealthy family. They deconstruct the whole thing and build something even bigger. Ruth gets to live in her brownstone. She's living the city life she always wanted. I can't remember what. Oh, Jenny ends up with her like high school boyfriend who's divorced.
Yeah.
They move to like Connecticut or something. I don't know where they move. They move somewhere and she settles in with his family. Beamer starts his own like meditative practice. He gets back together with Noelle, and I feel like Nathan and Alyssa just end up okay. And I think they like create an estate that he lives in with his in-laws, because his in-laws turned out were very loving and sweet and really supported him during the bar mitzvah when he started breaking down, when he was supposed to do like a prayer for his sons. And his in-laws, who like never really got a lot of like spotlight in the book, besides mentioning the fact that the father-in-law like never got to become the famed clarinetist, like they kind of take over and are really sweet. And it seems like they've rekindled their relationship altogether, and everyone's happy or unhappy, we're not really sure. Anyways, I don't know if I missed anything. I feel like it was all over the place, but that's kind of
I think you got everything. Like one additional thing we find out is Ike was the one that orchestrated this whole thing, this whole kidnapping, and we find out also that like all of that money, that like $220,000 has been sitting in his shed, just like rotting for years, because they're all marked bills and he can't use them, so they're unusable and they're just kind of sitting there.
Okay, Nat, I have to confess something. So when I was going over our notes and you're like, yeah, and Ike orchestrated the kidnapping, I was like, what? The only thing I could remember, I think that went over my head. And then I remembered a line that said, and they would never find the money until 4 years after Ike's burial. Was that the only moment that kind of said that Ike had done it, or did I miss a whole other passage?
I think there were like two maybe really subtle like tellings of that, and that was one of them. And I think another one was like he had I don't know, really inserted himself as this like caring person or whatever, and like I think that was a bit of mention there too. But yeah, that was it. There was no like big reveal. It was just like really subtly like woven into it, and I thought that was really interesting too. Like, that's not supposed to be something we're meant to focus on. It's like, okay, we have a little bit of closure, but let's move on, because that's not really what is important here. And I thought that was an interesting way to do it.
Interesting. Yeah, that totally went over my head. Like, I did not notice at all, and I don't know, I felt a little stupid, and then I went on Reddit and I was like, Long Island Compromise, like, did Ike kidnap Carl? Which, to me, that whole conversation with Jenny, because remember, she goes to the factory to talk about, like, what are you gonna do? Like, now they're not gonna be able to buy the factory. And Ike is like, oh, they treated me like family. Like, they put my wife up in a psychiatric hospital. But his son is really upset, and his son confronts Jenny and is like, I can't believe that your family is doing this to our family. Like, do you think that we'll ever be able to work again? Like, your family's set. My dad's never going to be able, like, my dad's retiring with nothing. All of that is now put in another light now that I know that Ike had orchestrated this kidnapping,
Yeah.
which is just so wild.
It
And it didn't
that's
work
so
out.
interesting. Yeah, because like I didn't like put those two together till you just said it, and it's almost like he was putting up this front, but he wanted to get the family, not the family, the factory one way or another. And when he found out that he wasn't gonna get it the way of buying into it, that he had planned with the family, maybe that's when he orchestrated this as like this alternate way
Mm,
to get his
mm-hmm.
plans to come to fruition. But it's also really, really interesting because, like, Max in the end is sort of, messed up. Like, he only has factory experience, so he can't get a job after the fact. And also, he's just, like, really bitter. Like, he's so angry at Jenny later on, right? And it's just, like, this, like, bitterness that is associated with the factory for both of them. And maybe it's a little bit more hidden for Ike.
Yeah. It could also be a generational thing. I think Ike is of the generation of, you know, you're meant to do a job. But then again, he orchestrated a kidnapping, so clearly he wasn't happy about things. But maybe he feels guilt over that, and that's why he's kind of smoothing things over a little bit. Whereas Max, I imagine, has no idea, and he just sees his father, who has no income, has lost a thumb, and, like, was
Yeah.
never really compensated. They're like, oh, he was taken care of because of that. This all, like, this whole thing is reminiscent of the show Succession to me. Did you watch that show?
Yeah, I love that show. It's so good.
I've been watching so much of it, and just the whole, like, the family taking care of things, but then also um like the Ruth, like the feeling of Ruth towards her children and the fact that they never had to suffer. And sorry to, like, go back to this again, but it just made me think of this moment. um there's a moment when the father in the show is, like, freaking out at his kids, and he's like, tell me the price of a gallon of milk. And no one can, he's like, somebody here fucking tell me the price of a gallon of milk. And he's yelling at everyone, and no one can answer it, and his kids, like, feel horrible after. And Roman goes to Jerry, like, the she's, like, I don't know how to describe her, like, high up in the company but also close to the father and Roy, or no, not Roy, Roy's last name, Lloyd, I don't remember. Anyway, she goes, I'll edit all that out. Roman's like, what do I do to impress my dad? And she's like, I don't know, like, learn the price of a gallon of
Logan.
milk. Logan, thank you. Oh my god. I'm like, just was watching it.
I know, I
I'm
know.
really
I've
bad with
rewatched so much
names.
of it.
Yeah, she's like, learn the price of a gallon of milk. Like, he grew up a certain way, and he resents his kids because they don't have to suffer, and he's giving them everything, and there's no way to not give them everything. But anyways, that's a whole other tangent.
Yeah. No, that's a great point though, and I actually wanted to like ask you about that. Like, it's interesting because Ruth's perspective is that her children haven't suffered, but a lot of this book is just showing us all the ways that they are suffering. It is
Mm-hmm.
struggle. To me, it's struggle in a different way. It's a struggle that Ruth doesn't understand. And I think that that is such a generational divide that a lot of like immigrant families,
Mm.
experience on different levels. On the generations, you sort of have this understanding that you're going to have a little bit more comfort, but then you're also going to lose out on uh, that sort of connection, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
That about what it means to struggle when you're making ends meet and you're really trying really hard to not be struggling on the day to day to make ends meet, right? So there's that aspect of it too. But once you have that comfort that money brings, you're struggling in different ways. You're struggling to be a person and the self actualization part of
Yeah.
it. And that doesn't mean that that's not hard. You know what I mean? And there's so much judgment in how Ruth is approaching it. And I was just kind of curious about your perspective on that. Like, are they not struggling too?
It's hard because it's like, yeah, they are, but then from the lens of someone who's struggling to literally survive, how do you tell someone like that that that's struggling? Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I think that that's kind of Ruth's perspective. Like, you can put band-aids over their struggles. You can hire your psychics or your tarot card readers, and, some of the band-aids aren't necessarily the best ones, like Beamer's painkillers, but then he's also able to go to like an $85,000 a week resort to cleanse himself of that and like feel a little bit better. Like, are their struggles real? Yes, but trying to convince someone like Ruth, or there's a little moment when I can't remember who is in, someone is going to jail for something. I can't remember who it was. And there's a little moment where they're like, and then the only other person there was a black man who, after being frisked, they found a joint on him. And then they go into the story of the person who's in jail who like committed a legitimate crime. And then someone's like, oh, we called a friend of a friend. They're a judge. They owed us a favor. Like, you're off scot-free. And then a really brief moment where it was like, and the black man had to spend overnight in jail. Something like that. And it was just
Marjorie.
a really... Marjorie,
Yeah.
yes, arson.
Yeah.
She had committed arson, and they're like, "You're so lucky because you got away with arson." And meanwhile, the guy who was profiled and then found with a joint had to spend the night in prison. So, I do think it's one of those things. Like, yes, everybody struggles, absolutely, rich people too. But I do think it's one of those things where it's like, try to convince someone who's actually struggling to survive that that's a real struggle, and I think you would have a hard time. So, and I think that's kind of a lot of the theme of the book, and what you were saying before about the generational part. It's interesting because in the first half it was alluded to, I think it might have been Ruth who said it, maybe someone else, but they said, the first generation um suffers to make something, and I'm going to misquote this, but this is the idea. The first generation suffers to create something, the second generation builds it up, the third generation burns it down, and this is what we're seeing. And it's a very literal rendition of burning it down, because in the end you do get the factory burning. I did wonder why there was a picture of like a house on the cover with the little like fire burning, and I was like, it's a kidnapping, why are they showing this? Is this like a metaphor? Nope, girl, it was literal. Like something was gonna burn down later on.
That
But
little Easter egg.
yeah, and I think that's, there's so many moments too where you mentioned that quote where um Ruth calls Jenny a rich girl, and she's like, "You're a rich girl, Ma." And her mom goes, "No." She's like, you have to be born into wealth to be a rich girl. She's like, "I and then, sorry, Jenny goes, "What, you don't feel rich?" And she's like, "No, I always feel like the ground's gonna be pulled out from under me." And I think that's accurate. I do think that if you're born into poverty, no matter how much wealth you accumulate, you're never, and I don't want to say you'll never feel secure. I do think you can get over your money trauma, but I do, like, you always are going to have a little bit of, be a little bit afraid that it's going to go away. And I don't know if people born into wealth do worry about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, because you've experienced it and you know what it's like on the other side. Whereas when you've always had it, you can't quite comprehend what it would be like to be there and to
Yeah.
have those feelings or have those days. So I think that's part of it too. It's almost like you're imagining it versus remembering it. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
there's such a like profound
And Jenny
divide
does
between
that.
that.
She imagines it all the time. Like she almost creates this performative poverty where she gives all of her money away. She was working for a union. She for the university, I'm sure she wasn't getting paid a very good salary. But at the same time, she had everything to fall back on. That it didn't matter that she was giving away the money in her bank account. She was still getting these like lump sums every quarter, like, and then there's the moment where she thinks that she has lost all of her money, and she feels this like sense of peace, like, oh, this is actually what it feels like to struggle. Like, thank God I feel at peace with myself. And in the end, she gets her money and she marries Brett, and they move in together, and she kind of has this new life where she does live as a rich girl again.
Yeah, Jenny's character is so interesting because it's like I just remember like this is such a like quintessential like university student who they're there. I feel like we're all those kids on some level without all of that wealth probably, but you know what I mean, where you're like just trying to distance yourself from everything
Yeah.
everything that has been comfortable around you, and a lot of that is just even like socioeconomic like norms around you, you know, like just ways of being as well. And I think that's what she's doing, just like on a much more massive scale. And I think that's part of why she's stuck in this college town where she doesn't want
Yeah.
to leave, because that's where she can continue doing these things. And it's so interesting because even with that pattern, people tend to go back to what they knew afterwards. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they go back to repeating those patterns, and that's exactly what she's doing. So there's something so like real about her. I don't want to say regression, but almost like giving in, because she wasn't really. I think there's this moment where Beamer's like, "You're not passionate about this,"
Hmm.
and like it's almost like a realization there. Like the only thing she's passionate about is not doing the things her family's doing, and I
Hmm.
thought that was such a great observation.
Oh my God. And that's such, it's so accurate. But it's so accurate for someone in like their early 20s, which almost seems like this wealth almost like stunted her growth a little bit. I feel like when you're in university, you don't really have to face reality quite yet. Like, or when, like, you're still kind of figuring things out, which is fair. You're still a kid. Like, oh my God, we're still in our like late teens, early 20s. You shouldn't have to figure out reality yet. Like, you're still experimenting with kind of like your identity, who you are, who you're going to become. Like it's such an exciting time, but you can also just move around a little bit. You don't have to decide yet. And Jenny's doing that, but she's prolonging it until she's like 40, and it seems like but she can. Like
Mhm.
most people when they finish school, they have to finish school and move on and get a job and pay off their student loans and pay for a roof over their head. She doesn't have to do that stuff. So she can kind of stay in this like exciting place in limbo for as long as she wants. And it's only when Beamer confronts her on it, just like you were saying, like, you're not passionate about this, you're passionate about not being a part of your family, where she kind of has a moment where she's angry with him, but she's angry with him because he's telling her the truth.
Yeah. Yeah. You need siblings to tell you what's what. Sometimes they see you the
Yes.
way,
Oh my
you
gosh,
know.
it's so true. Siblings know you through and through, and they know your bullshit. Like they can get through the bullshit very easily, and it's good to have them in your life.
I wanted to ask you about the game Mogul. It was just sort of thrown in there. I thought it was such a nice little touch. And Mogul is basically like The Sims, right? But it's just like just a layer deeper where you're really, you know, performing capitalism, I guess is how she puts it. You have a job, you have to like do things that further that capitalistic um I don't know, like goal, I guess. So there's like really interesting parts of that. Like if you give your employees, if you're like a boss or, you know, a higher up or exec in that situation, in that game, and you give your employees a pizza day or something like that, you get docked a million points or something like that. So whenever you do something out of the goodness of your heart, you get dinged for it, really. So it's really like teaching you in a way to be
A
a cold
capitalistic robot.
heart. Yeah, a capitalistic robot. And Jenny's nephew shows her this game, and basically she starts to play it a lot too. And um,
I love that he
it
says
doesn't
it
really.
calms him down. He's like the anxious kid. He's like, "You need this game. It calms me down."
Yeah,
Sorry, keep
that's
going. I
just
cut you off.
life. It no, it's really just life. You're just getting up and doing your job, and you're getting a promotion. And yeah, there's no points in real life.
No, there's not. I mean, there's like you might get a little raise or you might get a promotion or you might get takeout for dinner on a Friday night. Like it parallels how we all live through capitalism day in and day out. And Jenny is addicted to it, which I find hilarious that the person who wants to be so separate from capitalism and from her wealth finds comfort in this capitalistic society that she's trying to avoid is hilarious to me. And just the description of the game, like I can't remember I mean you described them so well, but they cracked me up every time. They were definitely like pieces of humor that I looked forward to.
Well, there was one other thing I wanted to talk to you about. There's this line I really liked. It's on page 38, 388, and it says,
388?
Mm-hmm. It says that's not what partnership is. It's not like what your parents do, where your mother protects him from having to be a person in the world. That's not partnership. And this is Noelle talking to Nathan, and it's in that
Mm-hmm.
moment you described earlier about her just having this like really mature. Sort of level-headed response to Nathan, like really just telling her that their lives are falling apart in this moment. Um, and I just thought that that was such a beautiful articulation because, a lot of the times we want to protect our partner,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a fine balance between that, between having that support and protection. And I just kind of wanted to discuss, what is the relationship between that? Because that is such a hard situation to be in, your partner, like Carl in this moment. She, because she's referring to Ruth and Carl, right? So Carl in this moment has been through something that's so traumatizing. Like, of course, you want to protect him and you want to support him in getting better. But over the years, as he's not getting better, what are
Yeah.
you gonna do? Um, when does that support become a form of protection? And then Carl is used to that protection too. So it's kind of like I feel like it's one of those questions where I don't know that there was ever like a right thing to do in that moment other than going to therapy. But just curious to get your thoughts on all of that.
I think putting it on a shelf was not the right thing to do. Because it didn't allow him to process it. Like when Ruth, there was a moment when Ruth went to the doctor to talk about Carl. She was like, he's on this medication. It's making him have like hallucinations and stuff. I don't know what to do. And the doctor, like, hands her a piece of paper. She's like, I can't deal with any more prescriptions. He's like, no, this is a psychiatrist. You need to take Carl there to talk to the psychiatrist because, like, he can't do this anymore. And Ruth is tries to protect Carl by not taking him to the psychiatrist and goes instead herself. And the psychiatrist essentially tells her, what does the psychiatrist tell her? I'm trying to remember now. It wasn't, oh, you need to be calm for him. You need to be very calm. And there's a moment when it's like, nowhere in history has a woman ever tried to convince a man that she's calm when he's telling her she's not. I think I highlighted that because it's like there's nothing more infuriating. It's like, well, I'm not calm now because you're like attacking me. But he's totally sexist, totally rude, and essentially he puts the burden on Ruth to make sure that Carl's okay by being okay. And even though she had such a tense moment with the psychiatrist, she does kind of take that to heart because the rest of the relationship is her just trying to make sure that he's okay, to the point where she totally neglects her kids in order to protect her husband. But again, this like weird protection isn't actually helping him in any way. Like it all started with Phyllis being like, this didn't happen to you, this happened to your body. And that kind of like set off, I think, a ripple effect for Carl just never getting better. And we see that unfold, and then Ruth is just left having to protect that. But I don't think that that was ever a true partnership. I do think Carl could have lived a longer, happier life. Like, obviously, PTSD, I mean, I'm not well versed in it, but I do think that with certain therapies, you can minimize the effects. I don't know if it ever fully goes away, but you can heal. Healing doesn't need to meet doesn't need to mean like a full you're going to go back to the way that you were before, but I do think he wouldn't have had as hard a time as he did if he had talked about what happened, talked about the kidnapping, let the kids in on the information as opposed to them being totally oblivious and having to figure things out themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But what do you think?
Yeah, you're right. Like, I think that part of it was really pivotal, when she goes to see the psychiatrist and this like advice she gets from him, like in that moment she's also just trying to figure out what to do, and when the world is sort of telling you, okay, the best thing to do is to shelve it,
Mm-hmm.
um how many times are you going to be told that before you're like, okay, yeah, I get it, maybe that's the thing to do? And that's how she ends up living her life. I think it's really difficult. Also, this person also told her to leave her baby at home. which is
Oh my
also
God,
infuriating.
yes.
Um, yeah, a lot of that was just bad. Like this whole like aspect of it happened to your body, it didn't happen to you. I find that so fascinating, like you are a part of your body. And I don't know if that part of that is like, the religion aspect too, where, your soul isn't really a part of your body and all of that. So maybe there's that to it. But how does something happen to you and doesn't happen? Or how does something happen to your body and doesn't happen to you? Your brain is part of your body, your heart is part of your body, all of your sort of physical reactions are part of your body. And so I really liked how they brought it back to it in the
Hmm.
end, where, he has this moment where he's finally not part of his body anymore. And he's like, oh, like this whole time I was really connected and now I'm
Yeah.
not. And now I understand the difference. So I liked how that was done too.
I appreciated that, how it came back around. Also, that little moment of like the afterlife when he's at the table with his family, and that there was this notion of a table, and the table was set for all the members of his family, and he's like, there's my children, and oh God, my grandchildren, like there's spaces for everyone to sit here. And the whole time, all that Zelig and Phyllis keep saying is, you're forgiven. And he's like, well, what about this? And he's like, you're forgiven. And he's like, well, what about what you did? Like, you killed this man. And he's like, I was forgiven. Like, it was a really beautiful moment. Like, if there was anything in the book that was going to bring me to tears, I think it was this moment where they just kept saying it over and over. It kind of reminded me of that moment in Good Will Hunting when Robin Williams is talking to Matt Damon and he's like, it wasn't your fault. It wasn't your fault. It was, and he goes over, he just keeps saying it over and over and over again. And the whole time Matt Damon's like, no, like, stop, 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 until he just like breaks down and starts bawling. And he just repeats it. And that's what that moment felt like at the table, where they just kept saying, you were forgiven, you were forgiven, you were forgiven. And how that all happened with it. That happened, I think, right after when he kind of realizes that his body and soul are the same thing, or like his body and him are one. And I think that that was also a little moment where Phyllis was able to be forgiven too for convincing him otherwise. Like, I don't know, it was
Yeah.
an interesting moment.
Yeah. You know what was really like interesting about this second half of the book is that like Zelig wasn't Jewish. He like he was
That's
doing
right.
a well, like it was assimilation, right? Like it was a form of self-protection where he like pretended to be Jewish. Like he didn't say anything, but he did not say anything either. Like
Mm-hmm.
um it was withholding,
That's so
but it was
true.
self-protection. So it's really interesting like how much of a mainstay like religion is in their lives. Um
And it was
because
fake.
it yeah, yeah.
That's so true. You're right. I didn't even think about that. But yeah, it even said like he it was in the moment when he met up with the rabbi when he was getting on the boat and they said a prayer over him. And he's like, and that was the moment that I decided, yes, I'm Jewish. Or I can't remember what the actual verbiage was, but yeah, you're right. And then this
Yeah.
family is just like a lot of the contention between Ruth and Jenny is the fact that, or sorry, between Ruth and Beamer, is the fact that his wife is like the epitome of Christian. Like, her name is Noelle, and she's like, you've got to be kidding me. And I think she's German. Like, it's just like all the things that Ruth does not want for her family, when in fact like they're not even really Jewish from its origins, which is fascinating. Wow.
Yeah, I mean that's so relatable too. It's like your family like holds so much so dear, but if you start to really like pull at the threads, it starts to unravel. And I think like Taffy just like wrote so well about some of those
Yeah.
aspects that are really relatable. I love this book.
I did too. This might have been, I'm trying to decide if it's my favorite so far this year. Because Good Material also really stuck with me as well. Um,
Mhm.
I don't know. What do you think, Nat?
I have such a hard time picking favorites. Yeah, I don't know.
I think in December we should do like a fun episode where we talk about all the books we've read this year. Not at length or we do summaries and stuff, but where we just like casually talk about them and decide like what our favorites were.
Yeah, that sounds good. We can do like a little ranking.
Yeah.
And have like little like thumbnails of them and we'll rank them 1 to 10 or 1 to 8 or whatever.
However many we read.
Yeah. Sounds great.
Okay. I feel like I could talk about this for hours, but we should. Yeah, sorry. Go.
Yeah, sounds good. I was going to say, let's talk about what we're reading next. And I think you know a little bit more about this book, but yeah, do you want to tell us about what we're reading next?
Yeah, so we are reading a book called Blue Sisters. I have my copy here by Coco Malores. And I don't know a ton about it. I listened to an interview of the author on a podcast, and her description of the book of 4 sisters. Nat and I, obviously, as you can tell, are both sisters, and it's about the 4 of them. One of them is dead, and so it's from the POV.
We're not each other's sisters.
No! Sorry, but I made it seem like we are sisters. Sorry, like we... I'm dying. No, in case anyone's confused, we're not sisters. We both have sisters. We are sisters in relationships with other people. That's a weird way to put it. Oh my god. Okay.
Both of us have sisters.
Both of us have sisters. And this book is about 4 sisters, one of which is dead, and I think it's kind of a little glimpse into these like 3 separate lives, and I'm very excited to read it. I don't know much more about it, so that's what we're covering next. We're gonna read the first half. We're actually gonna have like an in-between episode where we are gonna really have like a more of like a fun one where we talk about The Book It Ends With Us, because we did read that when we were on the break and we have some thoughts. So you will hear a little episode where I also have that book here. We're gonna have like a really fun, saucy chat because we're both gonna drink and talk about this, and that'll be a quicker episode. But then we're gonna be reading Blue Sisters. So please join us. We're gonna read the first half, and if you are a sister, you should definitely read it. If you're not, you should read it so you can understand what it's like to be a sister. And yeah, join us.
Sounds great. Okay, we'll talk to you soon about It Ends With Us, and then we'll get reading half of Blue Sisters. So,
sounds great. Soon. See you at book club.
Okay. See you at book club.
Bye. Bye.